Good morning. Thursday, the 21st of May, 2020. We are moving through the season of Easter, and today is the 40th day. In fact, today, on this day, back in the original time of the early church, this was the day when all the disciples gathered together and went up to the Mount of Olives, on which the Garden of Gethsemane is located, where Jesus had his last prayer meeting with his disciples, where he was arrested. So they went up to the top of the mountain, and he gave them his final instruction. And we looked before at what that final instruction looked like in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, as opposed to the Gospel of John. At the same time, though, they all agree then that was Jesus's final day of earthly presence. And so we call this the Festival of the Ascension. And it occurs not on a Sunday, but on a Thursday. So on a Thursday, he gathered with his disciples for his Last Supper. And then some weeks later, 7 weeks later on this day, or actually I guess it would be 6 weeks later, Jesus is now gone. 40 days after Easter, the 43 days, if you count both Thursdays, from the night in which Jesus was betrayed. Excuse me, a little froggy today. I tell you, all this wind is just stirring up lots and lots of allergies. I don't know how you've been, but boy, it's just been a blustery week, hasn't it? Very unsettling weather, cloudy outside. It just feels kind of dark in here, even in my basement studio. But we're on the road today. I had mentioned Saul before, this young Pharisee, this young ruler of the Jews, very zealous, and he wants to make his mark. And the one thing he wants to do is to stamp out Christianity. He wants to be the one to repurify the Jewish religion and return back to the rule-based system in which he has been raised, in which he has drank the Kool-Aid completely. He is as anti-gospel as anyone. He doesn't get it. Jesus isn't real for him. Jesus is a myth. Jesus was made up. And these disciples are spreading lies. Jesus was not raised from the dead. He died, was buried, and is still there, and that's it. And these disciples are going around and preaching heresy. And Saul doesn't simply want to remain in Jerusalem. He's not from Jerusalem. He's from Antioch in Syria, and he wants to go back to Syria. He wants to go to Damascus. That's the capital. That's the familiar territory for him. It's outside the Jewish area. It's Gentile area, but there are Jews living up there. And Saul sees what's happening. Saul sees Philip, John, Peter, and some of the others leaving Jerusalem, leaving Judea to spread their Christian filth, their heresy among Jews living outside of either Galilee or Judea. They've already infected Samaria. They're already making a stand and making noise in Jerusalem, and Pontius Pilate is going to react again if they're not careful. And now they're going up into Syria to convert Jews up there and Gentiles. And they're preaching this, not just heresy that Jesus is alive, but a double heresy, that God makes no distinction between Gentile and Jew, between man or woman, between slave or free, that God has taken down barriers that they've lived with, that they've believed in, that have provided the fabric of society for generations. Wow, this has to be stopped. It has to be stopped now. So Saul goes to the Sanhedrin, the ruling council of 70 in Jerusalem, and gets basically warrants of arrest so that he can then go to any synagogue up there in Damascus or any of the Syrian territory and then the guard from the temple going with him can put those people in chains or ropes or whatever they used, arrest them, take them back to Jerusalem where they will be tried, or perhaps they won't survive the trip to Jerusalem. They'll simply be taken outside the town and stoned the way Stephen was, the first of the 7 deacons. Saul is on the road. Chapter 9. This is one of the great stories. As I said, this week I'm looking at great stories. The book of Acts is full of great stories. And this is perhaps the most significant story other than Jesus and his disciples in the entire New Testament. Because we're going to see how Jesus calls a 13th apostle. Chapter 9, verse 1. Meanwhile, Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any who belonged to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. The way is what it was called. Path, way, method, the way. What is the way to God? Well, the way to God is to accept that God has made God's way to us. That's the ironic thing about the gospel. The way is already accomplished. Jesus said it. Thomas asked him, show us the way. And Jesus says, I'm right here. I am the way. I am the way. Me. Not a path physically on the ground, not a path by a rule book that you're used to, but a person. I'm the way. And I'm here. You're there. You're with God. You're with the Father because you're with me. It's done. You have to do nothing. Wow. No wonder Saul hated this Jesus and this heresy so much. You have to do nothing for your salvation. Whatever it was you did, you're forgiven. In the name of Jesus, you're forgiven. Whatever it was you didn't do, in the name of Jesus, you're forgiven. However badly you've served God, however poorly you've tried to be in prayer and discipleship and evangelism and serving God, however you've treated other people in your workplace or your neighbors or on the road when you're driving, it's forgiven. Let Jesus' love now transform all of those venues in your life, in your daily life. Or if it's like most of us now, sitting in our homes trying to figure out, all right, what do we do next? We're not doing a lot of driving, so we're not having a lot of road rage. But we acknowledge that there are people out there who don't have enough work, or perhaps their workplace is closed, or in the case of service and leisure, travel, that has been so impacted by COVID-19. There's some serious frustration. We want to figure out how to support these people and these businesses to the best of our ability while still remaining safe ourselves. We're not like Saul. We're not out on the road, at least not yet. I have a camp trailer that would love to get hitched up to my Tahoe and taken down the road. One of these days. Yeah. Verse 3, chapter 9. As Saul was going along and approaching Damascus, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground, and he heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? He asked, Who are you, Lord? The reply came, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But get up and enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do. The men who were traveling with him, that is to say, this temple guard, stood speechless because they heard the voice but saw no one. Saul got up from the ground, and though his eyes were open, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. For 3 days he was without sight. He neither ate nor drank. So this bright flash of light, he sees the face of the Lord. And we can count in the Bible a handful of people who ever looked directly upon the face of the Lord. Moses, the disciples when Jesus was alive. Now Saul of Tarsus. Noah spoke with God. Abraham spoke with God. There are people who say that they speak with God or God spoke to them. Well, in the Bible, there's only about 5 or 6. Are we saying that we're equal to those? I have a hard time crediting that. That's not how God speaks to me anyway. I'm not going to say, yeah, I'm up there with the great ones, that God has spoken directly to me. Well, Saul heard and saw. And for seeing, he was blinded. And for hearing, he went into deep shock. He could not eat. He could not drink. He couldn't see where he's going. They're probably on horses or donkeys, and the temple guard would have put him on his horse, or maybe even tied him to it. Or maybe they walked, we don't know, and went on. And they weren't that far from Damascus, apparently, so they went on and then went to the place where they would be staying. They would have prearranged for some kind of housing with the synagogue staff there. Verse 10, there was a disciple in Damascus named Ananias. And this is where we'll take it up tomorrow. See you then.